Doing a past paper walkthrough, you can go ahead and look at the description box down below to see if I'm on to see why I'm doing this particular paper, even though I'm going to be focusing on the OCR A biology and chemistry specifications in this channel, because it is quite useful. These past papers are actually quite useful because of the vast majority of application style questions that they have. And yes, it is a different spec, so there are some things in this spec that are not at all in our spec, but nonetheless it's still useful, and I'm daring enough to say that it's more useful than the old past papers, the legacy past papers of the original spec, because these have more application style questions, whereas the old spec legacy ones have a lot of more memory recall, which is good and all to test your knowledge, to test, if you know, for example, a process such as respiration, but it's not good enough to actually, because the thing is, these new exam papers, they have a lot of application style questions, and one of the main thing why people actually find them really hard is because there's not enough practice that they get from the old past papers. It's a completely new, so when they are in the exam, they're just in a new kind of, they're just, they're answering new kinds of questions, and they're really unsure whether to answer whether to answer it like this or like that, because the mark scheme can be specific. But either way, these questions, these past papers are very useful, so I'm just go ahead and do that. So the first question is, the St. Lawrence River in Canada has been identified as an area with very high biodiversity. Explain how the term biodiversity can be considered at different levels. Now, if you remember that biodiversity, this is pretty straightforward. But if you kind of don't still know how to answer this, I'm just going to kind of be giving you hints that if it's a question ever like this, most probably you can say it's within a species, or within one species, or between different species. Now, if you remember the words intraspecific and interspecific, you remember that intraspecific is within, so within the species, and then between different species. You can also go ahead and say, because of biodiversity, you can also say the variety between species, the variety between, you can even say the variety between ecosystems or habitats. There are many ways how the term biodiversity can be applied to different concepts, to different situations, etc. So the St. Lawrence River is rich in species of aquatic mammals, especially whales. In spring, thousands of whales swim from the Atlantic Ocean up the St. Lawrence River. 13 different species of whale have been recorded. One of these whales is the blue whale, etc. I do not know how to say that name, so I'm not going to even try. Photographs of blue whales are analysed by computers so that individual whales can be identified and population abundance can be estimated. Each blue whale is different in color and in the shape of dorsal fin. Different whales also have different patterns of scarring. State the two sources of phenotypic variation in the blue whale population. Now, we all know in biology that variation between the species, within a species, can be caused by two factors: genetics and environment. So that's pretty much your marks. And if you don't say one and you don't say the other, if you don't say, for example, if you only say genes, you forget and you leave out environment, you won't get the mark for that, obviously. So make sure you always remember that two sources of phenotypic variation is genes and environment. So now this question is, suggest one reason why it is difficult to measure the actual population size of the blue whale. Suggest one reason why it is difficult to measure the actual population size of the blue whale. Well, pretty straightforward. Remember that the blue whale is living underwater, so you can say that it's living at a greater depth. So it's living at a greater depth, and we can't reach there, or we don't know how to accurately measure the actual population because it is such at a great depth. Another pretty straightforward reason you could pretty much say is that they migrate. They're mobile organisms. They swim around. So that's that. But it's only one mark, so I would only put a plus to just say it does really emphasize suggest one reason. I do want to go ahead and say that suggest questions are actually, now this is, I was taught by my teacher, and it still lingers in my brain, still lingers in my mind, I should say, not brain, but it still lingers in my mind, that whenever a question says suggest, you have not been taught it directly. You can't memorize a certain, for example, you have been taught it. Obviously, in the exam, they will not ask you what is outside your spec. You have been taught it. There is no doubt in that. But in the sense, you haven't been taught it directly. So you've been taught it, but you haven't been taught it directly. Another way I can kind of explain it is that it's not the intelligent kind that kind of answer these questions, but it's like those that have had more practice, or so these are the kind of application style questions I was talking about. These questions, you haven't been taught it, as I've said it multiple times beforehand. It's just that you need to apply a lot of thinking. Now, I'm not saying this question is hard, but questions like these can be thrown across the whole paper, and people can say, oh, it's only 1 mark, it's only 2 marks, or it's even 3 marks, but they do add up to even a whole grade. So doing these questions, like, I'm not saying necessarily this question was hard, but the word suggest really reminded me, and I wanted to kind of just say that out loud, that these kind of questions do tend to be challenging. For example, this one, explain, you have been taught it. You can directly link the question back to your knowledge. Even this one, state the 2 sources, state, explain, these kind of questions, they're asking you to actively recall from your memory, from what you've been taught in class, or from your teacher, or from your textbook. But this one suggests one reason why it is difficult to measure the actual population size of the blue whale, even though the answer is nowhere near hard. Like, it is not an equation that you need to find out of the blue. It is actually just basic. It's like hidden in plain sight. These are the kind of questions that you may need to have more practice on, which is really good, because these CIE past papers are actually really good, because they have a lot of these questions. They have a lot of practice. Moving forward, the St. Lawrence River runs through very busy industrial areas. It has many ports for cargo ships, a good fishing trade, and many whale watching boat trips for tourists. Decades of whale hunting has caused a large decrease in whale population sizes. Since whale hunting was banned, whale populations have not recovered. 7 of the 13 whale species in the St. Lawrence River has been rated as endangered species. So there's 2 reasons why the populations of whales have not been recovered since the ban on whale hunting. So, if you remember to chapter 6.6, or chapter 6.6, or chapter 6.6, it's definitely 6.6. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's fine. But if you remember, there is a small section on ask strategies and case strategies. And even though this question doesn't have a lot of that hasn't got anything to do with this particular question. But if you remember that case strategies are usually larger organisms, low development rate, slow reproductive rate, etc. And you have R strategists, which are smaller organisms, and they have faster development rate, faster reproductive rate, etc. They tend to have smaller body masses as well, vice versa with K strategists. So, because whales are big, you can instantly infer from the question that and if you use what I just shared, you can basically infer that the reproduction rate can be quite slow. Um, because yeah, so you got that. That's definitely one. Remember, it's another suggest question. So you haven't been taught it directly, but you need to apply some parts of your knowledge to get the answer. Remember, it was hidden in plain sight. Another question you can say, really, really easy, is that there is a lot of competition. So obviously, um, whales need food, and there is competition between the types of different foods. So, for example, they like to eat a certain type of fish, which is probably in low stock as well, because there is competition. And obviously, if there's competition between the species, it will sort of die out, or it will not die out, but it will sort of not increase in size. So the next question is, fat samples are from under the skin of individual whales of several different species were taken. These were analyzed and the concentrations of the toxins DDT and PCBs were measured. Suggests why whales were found to have accumulated very high concentrations of DDT and PCBs in their fatty tissue. Again, this is a suggest question. You have not been taught it directly, but you are expected to answer it. So, suggest why whales are found to have accumulated very high concentrations of DDT and PCBs in the fatty tissues. Um, well, remember, fatty tissues. If in biology, the word fatty tissue should immediately picture of lipids, because lipids are fats. So, anyways, lipids are fats. So anything. So these are toxins that have accumulated in the fatty tissues. So one reason immediately can be that it is soluble. It is lipid soluble. Because if it's lipid soluble, therefore it can enter the fatty tissues of the whale. Another one is that it's just present. It's just available in the water. So remember, whales live in water. They eat, breathe, sleep. Everything they do is underwater. So, for example, if this kind of toxin was found in the oxygen that we breathe in, or the air that we breathe in, we would immediately say that the reason why there was high concentrations of DHT in humans or in pigs or whatever animal you want to say is because there were high concentrations of it present in the air. Same with whales. Well, they they it was present in water. So, um, algal blooms sometimes occur in the area of the Atlantic Ocean near the St. Lawrence River. These result from rapid population growth of unicellular algae such as Alexandrium tamarinensis. So I told you guys, I just won't be able to pronounce that. Either way, produces sexotoxin, a neurotoxin that causes muscle paralysis by acting on voltage-gated sodium channels, ion channels in neurons. So saxitoxin can kill the whales. Suggest how saxitoxin results in the death of a whale. Now, you are given the answer in the question. You just need to look for it. Okay, so let's just read this part again. So this thing produces toxin, a neurotoxin that causes muscle paralysis by acting on the voltage-gated sodium ion channels in neurons. So we have saxitoxin can kill the whales. So that's how this results in the death of a whale.